O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity and save our souls, O good one. It's been a while since I've preached because now I'm retired. And it is pretty common to begin a sermon in a very kind of easy way to just kind of glide into things. So I can begin even like Pastor Wilson did a couple weeks ago and say, goodness, this is not the pulpit that I used to preach in. It has been changed. It's been traded out. Well, there are parts of me that have been traded out too. So it's appropriate. And in fact, on Tuesday, Dr. Zeckman, who is sitting over there and whom I am happy to embarrass, is going to give me a new knee for the second time. And another way to ease into this is very easy today because I begin by wishing you a happy Groundhog Day. Happy Groundhog Day. You may have thought that we had Groundhog Day to ourselves, but it actually is part of, in a sense, the Christian tradition, because on this day, you know what it really is? It's called a cross-quarter day. It is exactly half the distance between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And this day has always been important. And in the church, this is often celebrated as Candlemas Day, the day you bring your candles to church to have them blessed. And the groundhog tradition didn't start here in America. It started with the Christian church long ago. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another fight. If Candlemas Day brings cloud and rain, winter won't come again. We do not have groundhogs here in Washington, but in Pennsylvania, where we lived before we moved here, there were groundhogs, and our neighbor's house had a nice big fat groundhog that dug a big hole by their foundation, and yuck. There's something about groundhogs. They spend a lot of their time digging in the dirt, and otherwise they spend their time eating, and they have no idea of the celestial mechanics that work around them to make the world go. Our 554 million mile circuit around the sun, they have no idea. I have to admit that I myself am sometimes like a groundhog. Just spend my time, my life, being focused on my own things, digging in my own problems, digging in my own stuff, and being unaware of the graciousness of God in all of the world, and being unaware of what is happening to other people. It's not good always to be a groundhog. So we don't always notice the presence of God. Frederick Buechner writes this in his book, Now and Then: "There is no event so commonplace but that God is present within it, always hiddenly, always leaving you room to recognize him, or not to recognize him, but all the more fascinatingly because of that, all the more compellingly and hauntingly. So this is the sermon. I started getting serious, so maybe it's time to just give you a little bit of lightness. How about if I talk about Winnie the Pooh? Winnie the Pooh seems harmless enough. He is cute and cuddly and soft-spoken, and he is Christopher Robin's favorite toy. But in his eyes, the whole world exists just for him. There's something that people have identified as Winnie the Pooh syndrome. That buzzing noise means something. Then he thought a long, long time and said, the only reason for being a bee is to make honey. And then he got up and said, and the only reason for making honey is so I can eat it. Winnie the Pooh is actually quite a narcissist. You may have heard of what a narcissist is. So Candlemas Day, the cross quarter day, and the light, you notice, has been increasing from day to day. And it is by design that the readings of the church over this time and Epiphany have been more and more revealing about who Jesus is. You remember Jesus, the little baby born at Christmas? Very sweet, very wonderful. We learned a little bit more about Jesus. There was a baptism. In some other churches today, we're celebrating the presentation of Jesus as a little baby in the temple, and he is recognized, and they say, oh, this is the Savior, this is wonderful. And now we're coming to the gospel for today. Jesus is being more and more revealed to us. But this time when reality leapt off the page, the reception was very different. Who are you? You're just Joseph's son. Why don't you do for us what you have been doing for other people? We are important. Yes, you will see miracles, says Jesus, but they will be for the pagan outsider Gentiles rather than for you chosen insider Jews. And he gave two examples about how God blessed two impure and unclean Gentiles, the destitute widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon, whose son was raised from the dead, and Naaman, the military commander of enemy Syria, who was healed from leprosy. Even worse, the two stories feature their national heroes, Elisha and Elijah. All of a sudden, what was on the written page was easy to deal with because it was on the written page, and the scroll became real. So at this point, the superficial praise of Jesus turned into violent hostility. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove Jesus out of town, took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him down the cliff. The crowd was filled with rage because he said, God loves other people than you. For Jesus, God's care for the Jews did not mean the exclusion of the Gentiles. Throughout the Gospels, the Jewish Jesus always embraced the unclean Gentiles. So, what do we see in this gospel lesson? I remind you of other gospel lessons that you have heard of in other times. If you have done it to the least of these, you have done it unto me. When have we seen you starving? When have we seen you in prison? We believe that the image of Christ is in every person. And in fact, in some liturgies, you bow to other people to recognize the image of Christ within them. And so the question that arises from this gospel lesson is simply this: if the image of Christ is in every person, which Christ is it okay to throw over the cliff into the garbage heap? Which image of Christ in our world today is okay to throw over the cliff? Do you know the answer to that? The answer is no one. No one is okay to throw over the cliff. Maybe you get tired all this time of hearing how God favors the unfavorable. That's the way it is. And that's the way it is in this church body. I looked up our vision for the Southwest Washington Synod, of which we are a part. Our vision, it says, is shalom, God's love, healing, and justice at every level of life. We receive and reveal God's gracious love, which brings to each person peace with God and peace within the deepest self. We are all invited into Christ's new community where all are equally valued, where none are diminished or abused, and where we learn to live in new life-giving ways that renew families, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. We join with the Spirit of Christ to oppose destructive evils within and around us, including racism, oppression, poverty, and with Christ to bring God's transforming realm of compassion, justice, and peace among all people, nations, and ethnic groups in our present world. Okay, now, what do you do in the sermon next? Well, there was another reading we had, and that was the wonderful reading from Corinthians, the very famous passage about love. And it is so excellent in itself and so famous that there's not that much to say to add to it, but I will try. But to do that, I will jump from gophers and from the literature of Winnie the Pooh to the literature of our friend Dostoevsky. Why not? In the Brothers Karamazov, there is a character who is Father Zosima, who is one of the central figures and a very saintly monk. In the Brothers Karamazov, Zosima states this: hell is the suffering of being unable to love. Hell is the suffering of being unable to love. I cannot be fired because I'm a guest preacher. So I have immunity, and this is a time when I am going to give you my fire and brimstone. Really, I mean it. Fire and brimstone, because hell is the suffering of being unable to love, and our new leaders in this country are in hell. And they are trying to bring us into hell with them. Not in a nice, comfortable, handy basket, but on an express train. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let all who hate him flee from before his face. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let those who hate him flee from before his face. You're kind of quiet now. This is the time in the sermon when you give a personal story. About 20 years ago, I sort of walked away from the ministry. I searched around for other things to do, and I floundered for quite a while. That was after I had been here. And I want to mention, of all people in the world, my mother-in-law. Mother-in-laws are good for examples. I did not always agree with every opinion of my mother-in-law, but I did actually in real life call her Saint Anne, and she was. It came to pass that on a very cold day in March in Cleveland, we were all gathered together because of a family tragedy. Gathered together, standing in a funeral home during a wake. And at that time, my mother-in-law came up to me with tears in her eyes. And she said, "Dan, you have to go back to the ministry. You have to go back. You have to tell people to love one another. You have to go back and tell people to love one another." And that is what pushed me. As Lutherans, people trying to be Lutherans, we believe in the priesthood of all believers. So you are a priest too. You are a minister. Go out there and tell people to love one another. Let God arise. Let God arise from off of the page. Let God arise by loving one another. After that deep breath, I'm going to go back to Dostoevsky. Father Zosima again. Do not be forgetful of prayer. Every time you pray, your prayer is, and if your prayer is sincere, there will be new feeling and new meaning in it, which will give you fresh courage. And you will understand that prayer is an education. Love a person even in his or her sin, for that is a semblance of divine love and is the highest love on earth. Love all God's creation, the whole, and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. Once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day. And you will come at last to love the whole world with an embracing love. We must love not occasionally for a moment, but forever. Father Zosima further says, love can never be an offense to Christ. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one.